The first 50 to 100 turns in Ara History Untold are extremely important, and if you are like me, you may be struggling to get off to a good start due to all the different aspects of the game that are, well, really not super well explained even in the tutorial. Luckily for you, we here at the Game House have learned through trial by fire to bring you our top tips and our beginner's guide to help you through the early game. We will be splitting these different tips into 3 sections: your city, the tech tree, and then war and prestige. Some of these may loosely fit in others as well, so keep that in mind as you're listening to these. Before we dive too deep, we hope that you will consider liking and subscribing as we put out more sports, esports, gaming, and Ara History Untold specific content for you to consume. Also, take a look at our Let's Play of Ara History Untold if you want to see, well, how we struggled to get to these different beginner tips. That will be linked in the description below. With that, let's hop into the first set of tips in this section about your city. The first one is going to be get as much food as you possibly can, and this will really be important for you at the beginning of the game. In the tutorial, it tells you that you need to get a farm first, and this is great advice. You need to get at least 1 farm first, and even with your first expansion, you may want to consider 1 or 2 more on top of that, because food is the thing that gets depleted quickly. New cities, new armies, we'll explain that in the army section a little bit later, but all of those will start to devour food at a much quicker rate than you might realize. Then, after that, I would add a workshop. It's something that is going to be important when you're trying to craft, especially some of those early tools, which can actually help you with your farms and get you more food. The last thing is going to be getting a dwelling for your city, and while some people may say you can wait on this, with some of the early turns, it's not a bad idea so that you don't have to end up using it later when you're maybe trying to build an army or something else, and it allows your city to expand naturally without it getting blocked at, I believe it's 5 units. This one expands it to 10, and I would highly suggest it. After that, when you get your scouts, and you should have 1 to start the game, you're going to want to go look for caches first. What I mean by that is scouting the game is good, and you can work through open borders with some of the other civs or nations, whatever you want to call them. Those caches are going to give you a lot of valuable materials, crafting items, gold, even sometimes upgrades to certain units, similar to how they would in Civilization. You want to go grab those first, and then you can go and scout around the rest of the map. The next thing is going to be, you want to try to get an early settler as soon as you can to find a good space, well, as soon as you find a good space, more accurately, for a second city. And this is because you may really like the area that you start out in, and the other nations are going to as well, and they will settle over there very, very quickly. Getting an early settler will help you do so many other things, and not just expand your new empire, but also it's going to help you with your armies. It's going to help you with food as well, especially in the early game. We highly suggest that in the first 50 turns, you build a settler, or at least the first 75 turns at the minimum. The last 2 things here for your city are going to be, when you're expanding, you want to go for regions with resources and more than 3 improvement spaces. And then the last one's going to be using your early resources and crafts for tribes, because they're going to help you expand your city as well. This is both maybe conjoined into 1 tip, but it's about improving your different regions. And these regions are very important, as not only are they going to have the different resources that you may need to get furs or early metal, but they're also going to give you those more tile improvements that you're going to need. And the ones with 3 spaces or even 2 spaces are generally going to be ones that you'd maybe want to use more to block off other nations from coming into your area, or if you're just running out of space, those can be the last ones that you fill up. But in the early game, you're going to want to get tile improvements or region improvements that have at least 4 or 5. There should be many of them around you when you start the game, and you're going to want to use these to give to the tribes. They're going to give you these different stories that you want to use, and the tribes actually give you a lot more citizens, sometimes up to 1,500 to 2,000 new population, and that's going to help your city expand very, very quickly, giving you more options for these regions, as we discussed earlier. When it comes to tech, you may just be tempted to go from top to bottom, but we don't necessarily think that's the best way to go. And do note that depending on the nation or the leader, whatever phrasing you want to use, this may be influenced differently, and you may want to choose something else. It's really going to depend on the style that you play the game, but these are just some general early tips for just about every leader. And the first one really is going to be researching techs with prestige. They give that for a reason. They are some of the best techs within that age, era, again, whatever you want to refer to it as. But the best one, at least in our opinion, is going to be rushing archers. You may want to do it as the very first one. Getting the one with the granary is also a pretty good idea. As we mentioned earlier, food is important. But after that, getting archers is very important, and we'll explain a little bit more why in the war and prestige section. But do note that not only is it going to give you more prestige, it's going to give you a very good early game unit that should give you an advantage in different battles. The other thing is going to be, don't skip any of the beginning techs. Even though you will be tempted to head straight into the Bronze Age as soon as it's available, you don't want to do that. It's going to cost you too much later as you continue going on through the game. This is because a lot of the different techs have a lot of the building blocks that you're going to want, and you should be lucky enough that most of the other nations are going to take their time, and you should too. They aren't going to blitz their way through all of the different ages. They're going to take their time and get as many of the techs as well, so that you can get as many of the improvements, crafts, and all the other different buildings that you may want, including some of the triumphs, which we'll dive into a little bit more in the war and prestige section as well. Rushing to the Bronze Age, some may argue, can give you an advantage, but you are going to miss out on so many different things. So when it comes to tech, you're really going to want to keep yourself in that Neolithic, that first age, for as long as you possibly can. We've talked a lot about the war and prestige section. We're heading into it now, and we are combining war and prestige because they often go hand in hand. While you can absolutely win a game of Ara History Untold without going to war too often, it will be nearly impossible due to the aggressive AI to completely stay out of wars. So, with that, we're going to start with the wars section with the forces, army section. It all kind of combines into one. The first thing is going to be that you want to get one spearman to start the game. Do not get more than that. This should be enough for you to be able to defeat some of the wildlife that you may need to expand into a certain area, or to at least defend yourself a little bit. But after that, you really should only go into battalions, and maybe not even keep that one spearman for too long. You may want to disband it within the first 50 to 100 turns. Most likely it'll make it through like turn 75, because there are going to be tribes that are going to want that one spearman. And if you can give that up to them, it will allow you to get up, a level with that tribe, which will allow you, again, to hopefully bring them in and get their population. With that, you want to get the wedge specifically. And this is why we talk about getting archers. You need one spearman and 2 archers to make the wedge. This will give you your first true army, your first force in the game to be able to defend yourself, because trust us, there are, or me specifically, there are a lot of different nations that are going to want to go to war with you as quickly as possible. Specifically, Joan of Arc. She has been just an absolute thorn in our side through many different games that have been played. She is often one of the first nations that we meet, and she goes to war with you generally within the first 100 turns. There will be many aggressive nations like that. You will want to make sure that you have at least 1, maybe even 2 battalions if you can do it. The other little thing here, and this one could have gone into the city section, but do note that you can queue multiple projects at once. So once you decide that you're going for battalions, you can queue that spearman and 2 archers just all in a row, get them out of the way, and get that battalion mustered as soon as you can. With this, armies require a ton of food, a lot of food. It may not feel like you are really going to burn through your food, but let me tell you, the moment that you start getting battalions, that is the minute that, a lot of your food is going to start disappearing, because, those soldiers are hungry. So make sure that you are getting as much food as you can, as we discussed in the first section, to make sure that your battalions and your armies are fed, because otherwise they will lose their force, or their strength, I guess is what they call it, in the game. It cuts it in half, and that can be a massive determinant for whether or not you're going to win a battle or even win a war, as those are two different things. Also, you're going to want to get more space for your land forces, meaning you're only going to have 1 or 2 battalions that you can get, and you may want more to be able to continue your conquering, or at least continue defending yourself from, again, different nations like France and Joan of Arc. And the only way to do that is to get more cities with over 4 populations. So get as many of those as possible. This is another reason why you want to get that early game settler, in order to make sure that you can have that second city and get that extra slot for a new battalion, and that will allow you to continue to grow out your army. Now we're into the prestige sections, and do note that winning battles individually and winning wars and knocking out specific units, taking cities, all of that is going to give you a lot of prestige. And in the early game, this can be really important, as once you get through your 4 different ages, you're going to head into that second act, and you don't want to be at the bottom. That's the whole point of the game. If you are in those forgettable different nations or civs, then you're going to be kicked out of the game. It's game over for you. So if you want to try to gather up as much early prestige as you can, try doing different skirmishes, try doing defense for different wars, and try to keep that war going as long as possible so that you can defeat as many different units as you can, in order to continue to rack up that prestige with your military in the early game. The last and the most important tip: triumphs. Triumphs are worth a ton of prestige. A lot of the triumphs in the early game, specifically in Act 1, are worth 100 prestige. That can absolutely change the game. You can end up being in that forgettable tier and bump yourself all the way up into the memorable, or even I forget what the second and first tier are called, but you can bump yourself up very quickly, because you're gonna be, depending on how many different nations you put in the game, you're gonna be very close with a lot of them, and getting that extra 100 prestige can really skyrocket you up towards the top and give you a really good advantage. So when you have the opportunity to do a triumph, and do know that they will take as well 1 entire region, so having those 2 or 3 space regions may be good for a triumph, in order so that you don't lose as many different slots within each region. You'll want to save those for your triumphs so that they can take that over and give you that extra prestige. If you think that we missed anything, let us know in the comments, because that's the end of our tips. Maybe we will have missed something, and you will be able to help someone else out so that they can get their best advantage as beginners in Ara History Untold. And we hope that this early game guide for Ara History Untold will help you navigate your early turns as you set out on your mission to win your very first game in Ara. For more on Ara History Untold and many other games, keep it here at the Game House, and from our house to yours, we will catch you on the next one.